Wrath Classic suddenly looks substantially different in a really meaningful way.
Dude, you walked into work without seeing the news, or like you just glanced the headline on Wowhead, and I was like, Matt, this changes everything in the finest tradition of our titles and thumbnails. And you were just kind of like, what? And I'm like, no, Matt, get a load of this. And I explain it. And then Jared walks into the room and we're all just like, oh, holy fuck, that actually does change a hell of a lot. So you know what, Matt? While we do have a bunch of Dragonflight stuff, do you want to head straight into the Wrath Classic thing? Because I feel like that's what's popping. And it's honestly, dude...
Just before that, I will say the Dragonfly stuff is also pretty good.
It is, yeah.
I played a little bit more of it. I'm still impressed with everything and the class changes. We have like a full doc of everything they promised and like feedback and stuff like that in the blue post. And this doesn't feel like Blizzard. That's the one thing I've taken away. Is like, are we in the full-on Twilight Zone? There's the video will go up soon, but there's a whole load of drama over an FF14 over job balance. And then in World of Warcraft, class feedback is getting addressed within 2 weeks. I'm like, what fucking upside down world am I in?
World of Warcraft is good.
Yeah.
You are entering to Mr. GM. He was speaking to Wowhead. And they talked about a few things that they're doing, right? And here's the deal. This is some changes, like, not some tweaks. This is some changes with a goddamn capital C.
Yeah, these are like deeply fundamental changes to how the game's going to actively play in terms of loot looping during loop, which is more than I expected them to do. It's substantial and it's great.
Here's what's going on. Phase 1 obviously is going to be Sartharion, Naxxramas, the Malagos one, like that's going to be your raids, okay? And then when Phase 2 comes out, then, well, hey, we're going into Ulduar, right? Big excitement. Now, it used to be, back in the day in Wrath of the Lich King, there'd be some funny business with the Valor Point. Okay, the badges weren't called this, but effectively we can say Badges of Justice and Badges of Valor. They would move up, but, other things wouldn't change, right? Like, what was your new way of, like, accessing the gear? Well, there'd be a new boss would open up in Vault of Archivon.
Oh, yeah.
But, the dungeon loot would, of course, be the same, right? The dungeon loot would be the same. It's like, okay, how are you going to get some loot? Well, perhaps after Ulduar, Trial of the Crusader, when, the Argent Crusade stuff comes out. So Blizzard have evidently looked at the overall situation here and they thought, okay, can we make some, like, change jujitsu, technically small changes that have a humongous impact? And they've actually added a new difficulty mode to dungeons. It's called Heroic Plus, but before your head explodes, do not worry, there is no timer. I bloody well hope.
It's not, it's like,
I know there's no timer.
It's not, calling it Heroic Plus in the world where Mythic Plus exists is a terrible idea for branding. It is basically just they're introducing the idea of Heroic with a hard mode, because the way they explain it is you will basically, there's a ritual object as why this is literally going to be live. I don't know, some changes might happen to it, but there'll be a ritual object outside the dungeon. You and your 4 party members, so everyone has to do it. We'll channel it the same way you would like a summoning stone or a ritual or something, that kind of thing for warlocks, and then that will invoke some in-world shit that will then make the dungeon literally harder in terms of it'll like in the same way Mythic Plus scales, it'll like turn up all of the values to a little bit higher, but at a fixed value, so it's not like it's not eternally scaling. There won't be affixes as we know them. Chris said to Wohead at least that there will be some extra combat stuff in there to make it a little bit different.
Fuck yeah.
So assuming that is actually good and they actually kind of design that well, then it is effectively here's an extra, a slightly harder difficulty, basically so you can do dungeons at a higher level and not get wrecked for it.
Bro, you could rename this fucking Michael's Wet Dream because I'm that nerdy. No. You almost could, because the thing that like was my fucking jam back in the day was Cataclysm Heroics. Whenever Ghostcrawler did that, wow, dungeons are hard post, I was like, fuck yeah, let's go in here. And okay, we were doing it for like what, item level 178 blues at the start of Kata, but you see when you were doing those Kata dungeons in a static, ooh, chef's kiss, stone core, breaking bones upon bodies, great time. Just awesome. Dungeons can be awesome. Hard 5-man content is just goddamn awesome. But the problem always had been in World of Warcraft that you just do the dungeons and they're done. That's why Mists of Pandaria didn't have any dungeons added to it. Because Blizzard, they added 3 dungeons at the end of Wrath, and of course they added in the trial one. They added in dungeons throughout Cataclysm, and they found all right, we add new dungeons in, they're a bit harder, so everyone just does those. And now we've turned the dungeon pool from 8 to 2. Uh-oh. And then in Mists of Pandaria, they're like, fuck it. There's really no place for dungeons outside of the launch. Why are we doing these again? So they add no more dungeons. And then in Warlords of Draenor, they make a set of goddamn beautiful, awesome dungeons.
Incredible.
Only for the duration of the expansion, almost, to have people not really doing that much because they didn't fucking matter until they invented Mythic. And that's the funny thing, because the original version of Mythic Dungeons is something that barely any players played. It was at the very end of Warlords of Draenor, which was a very low point for the game. It was the same patch they had at Time Walking. These were dungeons. They didn't have a timer. They were just those dungeons, but harder. And I think maybe some new mechanics here and there. But at the very least, they were harder. And I remember going into them and thinking they were an absolute blast. So if that similar level of combat difficulty and engagement in a dungeon format can be applied here, I think that's going to be fantastic. Now, you might be wondering, what is looting like? How does this work? How does it fit into the game? Well, there's 2 broad categories we've got to talk through, and first I've got to talk through how raids are going to be working, right? When Phase 2 starts, Naxxramas will be the old raid, Ulduar will be the new raid. And, if it's anything like what Modern WoW is like, people don't go to the old raid anymore. Now, the way that it's going to work is whenever Phase 2 starts, Naxxramas 10 will drop loot from Naxxramas 25. Now, if you have not played Wrath of the Lich King, you might not really understand what that means, because you'll just say, well, it's 10 normal and 25 normal. Surely they drop the same loot. No, they don't. Back in Wrath of the Lich King, well, first of all, normal and heroic did not actually exist for Naxxramas, right? It was just Nax 10, Nax 25. It was Ulduar that added in the hard modes, and then after Ulduar, it was codified into a difficulty mode that you could right-click and select in your character portrait. So 10-man and 25-man had different loot. 10 was easier than 25, 10 had a slightly lower item level of reward. So essentially, by making the 10-man drop loot from the 25-man, they make the somewhat easier, more puggable version, right, that requires less organizational effort to pug, they make it drop better loot. But of course, it's still loot that is below the current tier, because Naxxramas 25 is below Ulduar 10. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but how do I... Right, so I understand. They're making it so that I can just go and run Nax 10 to quickly get geared up with Nax 25 tier gear, which is all going to be, real good and nice. Of course, you'll be earning, currency and stuff, and you can get currency from those. You can buy shit with your currency. That's great. You're thinking, how do I get there? Well, back in the day, you'd be running your dungeons, and, you'd be maybe getting some of those currencies to buy some badge gear. Well, now, this is when the Heroic Plus system comes in, because the loot that drop from the previous tier's 10-man raid will drop from the Heroic Dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically just kind of going, here's all of the old stuff is now one up.
Yeah.
And then HC dungeons are that level below, so...
Yeah, you run your regular HC dungeons, those will get you 170-something, 180-something, 183, I believe, blues. That's me trying to remember my Wrath days. I haven't looked at the new stuff.
I'm always really bad at item levels for some reason.
You're getting your 183 blues from normal heroic dungeons plus item level 200 rares, that big sword that King Yearman drops, right? And then from those... Yimmeron, that's it. From those, you then move up to doing a HC plus dungeon, which will give you Naxxramas 10 gear. So once you've done some HC plus dungeons with your friends, you'll be in a bunch of, I don't know, I level 206 gear, I think, maybe. 206 or 209, one of those. And from that point, you've got all this Nax 10 gear that you got from the Heroic Dungeon.
Well, it's literally Nax 10 gear.
You can now literally go into Nax 10, which will now drop Nax 25 gear.
Yeah.
I know it's confusing, but they're obviously retrofitting it in. So this just means you have this nice smooth gradient from normal dungeon, Heroic Dungeon, Heroic Plus, Nax 10, and then that, once you've done a whole bunch of Nax 10s, you are raid ready for Ulduar. So this is going to prevent, one of the issues that now this is an issue that the Burning Crusade faced as an expansion. I mean, I say issue, to some people it's a big cool hill to ascend. Let's not install a ski lift on it. Here, they're obviously installing the ski lift to get you up the item levels, but they're at least doing that in a way where you're actually, earning via doing real goddamn content. Because even, you see when the Heroic Dungeon Finder came out, which, that was 3.3, right?
That's 3.3.
So, what would happen there when the Heroic Dungeon Finder came out is you'd spam heroics, dude. You would do your ICC trio, of course, and you'd spam heroics. Now, at the start of the expansion, heroic Halls of Lightning, that could whip your ass. And if you're a total dipshit, you'll also die, because, hey, it was Wrath, a lot of us were young and stupid, I certainly was. But especially in today's world, goddamn, they're going to be absolutely turned into a fine mist. So, that's what you were doing in patch 3.3, you're just running randos, just getting your, going to get some badges of frost.
Praying for Pit of Sauron to get some actual gear.
Bingo. And, when you were in those ICC trio dungeons, they were really fun. The rest, though, was just a big old grind. So now, a player who would have been doing that, what are they going to be doing? They're going to be going and running some real content. Assuming
to be determined.
They get the balance right.
Yeah, to be determined.
And I think that is really good. And I think that by incentivizing people to do the 10-man of the previous raid, by that dropping the 25-man gear, that is a really nice way to get people into raiding. Because one of the things that I think was very successful and healthy for World of Warcraft at that stage in time was that the 10-man difficulty mode, it was less socially challenging for a guild, and it was also easier than 25. A bit like how you have a normal mode and a heroic mode now. And that ended up working, I think, really well for that expansion. And indeed, as soon as we move into Cataclysm, where, you had 10-man, you had 10 normal, you had 25 normal. Cataclysm moved 10 up to 25. But then there would be instances where, of course, because you've got fewer players, if the mechanics scale down in a linear fashion almost, the 10-man mode could be more punishing. Like, I remember, as I keep on saying, my default anecdote for this is the council fight, towards the start of Throne of Thunder, which was way more of a fisting than 10-man. So, overall, I think that this is really them trying to refactor the whole thing into something that will feel just more healthy, more playable, that is going to be focusing people in on actually playing good content. I'm just really for this. In principle.
Yeah, that's one of the things you run into a lot of the time. You're in principle behind a lot of changes, and then it kind of doesn't pan out the way they intended. This one I very much imagine will pan out as they intended, because it is just, hey, we're just refactoring the loot loop to make more sense. And it doesn't stop it, but it's like a little bit of a blend between the versions of World of Warcraft that are TBC or vanilla, which is, well, difficulty-wise now, with how good players are, you could argue you can just skip stuff because you don't need as much item level to succeed. But theoretically, compared to how they're played at the time, there was like, here is the progression. Here is the linear progression of do raid for X weeks, get geared, now you can go to the next raid. That kind of linear progression standpoint that is now confined to difficulties only. It used to be actual content, so you'd have, I'm going to need to get X gear to do Y content. Then I'll do X2 gear and get Y2 content. And it's like, it's preserving that, but that whole thing, that progression fell to absolute shit whenever they started to realize the patch cycle of, we need catch-up gear. Because once catch-up gear started to exist as a concept, and then once catch-up gear stopped existing as a concept of, work for catch-up gear, and then started to be just the handouts to get people ready for the next thing, which they very much, that's very much what it is now. Where it's, you can not be geared from 3 patches and then come back and be fine. You could be a Shadowland. Well, Shadowland's a bad example because there's only 2 patches. But, you go from 8.0 to 8.3 and there's enough catch-up to get in there to a degree. So it's it's preserving that experience of actual progression, because that's where it started to go a little bit wrong with all these difficulty curves. Making it a little bit more sensible by adding steps along the way, which still feels a little bit of a... little bit of like a hand to the designer is still there, but at least they're being added in what seems like a pretty effective for the time sense. And one thing that I think is a pretty decent bit of flavor from this, and that was reading into the interviews and listening to Chris Sergett talk about it specifically. There's a lot of elements where he goes, "Oh, I was the original designer on this, and this. I was the one who did the numbers for this at the time." And knowing that in mind, knowing the experience of how it actually went, no, well, this would be better now if I did this.
Yeah.
That was specifically talking about like some of the changes they're going to make to... Yeah, there's like when they were talking about nerfing the item levels and then decided to go another way instead. And that's very much like some of that, okay, well, we need to balance this way and then temper that with player feedback to go, okay, we can solve the problem in a way that doesn't feel bad for you. And that's the idea of... This is more than Classic was and more than TBC was. This is very much almost in a couple of ways, especially when you look at like the removal of the random finder or the withholding of it, some people might say, because people are like, oh, it'll be there any day now. They'll give in, but it's very much a second chance at Wrath in a way.
Yeah.
That's what makes it interesting, especially specific items he's talking about wanted. If he gets time, he'll change some of them to be the way they wanted. And that is just, oh, you get a second chance, but however many years later, so you actually have the experience and the tech and stuff like that.
Like, straight up, is it not pretty fucking cool? I mean, I know there's all the criticisms the world to make of Blizz. Don't worry, and we've made them. But is it not really cool that, like, many years ago, let's just say, Chris was working in this content, and maybe some other people in the Classic team. Yeah. And now he's like so much more experienced. He's got so much more shit under his belt. And now he can go back to, like, in a way, the glory days of his game design youth or whatever, and be like, I'm going to get a look at this again as someone who's had all this experience. And I'm going to deliver to you, like, my remastering design-wise of a thing I did. Yeah. Like, in principle, that's really cool. Like, how many times, you almost have like, oh, it's a remaster or whatever, and it's just they've tried to make a HD version of Assassin's Creed, and for some reason the lighting's broken and everything looks a bit weird. It feels like that. Whereas this is like original designer gets to go and change things up.
Yeah, and that's very
cool.
It's very different to making a sequel. Because especially when you get into the realms of like World of Warcraft changing so much after Kata, this is very much a, hey, what if we take the last chance we have at correcting some of our mistakes from the past, or not even correcting our mistakes in a major way, but like improving things. So it's like, oh yeah, so we think that the gearing loop, yeah, dungeons were dead. How do you fix that? Let's make some harder dungeons. And they probably had that idea back at the time. But then they were like, well, we don't have content because sorry, everyone's currently working on Cataclysm, so we can't do that.
Knee-deep rebuilding all of Azeroth.
So that's that thing where, hey, I can see people complaining, well, it's not exactly like Classic, and that's the thing where I went back and forth on this as I've seen changes happen, but I think they've been pretty good at writing the line of, what's a change that makes sense? What's a change that's actually kind of good? And when it hasn't been good, winding it back, like we're talking about how they might wind it back with like some of the Season of Mastery, like removing world birth stuff. So I think it's very kind of not quite Classic Plus, but because people want more content. This isn't more content. This is some numerical tomfoolery added, but in a way that feels realistic to the time. In that, if any of this stuff was added, or if Wrath was this way before, no one would have, it wouldn't be anachronistic.
Yeah.
And also I think the problem is that people, well, this is weird. I know people are going to disagree with me on this, but I feel like if you want Wrath Classic and you're waiting for Blizzard to make Wrath Classic, then you probably don't really want Wrath Classic all that much, because there's been private servers that give you accurate Wrath or close enough to accurate Wrath for a long time. And now Blizzard are actually taking proper design work to kind of fix small problems. It's like, this is the improvement. I know people will disagree, and that's completely fine. I can completely understand why you would want to not play P servers and wait for actual thing. I completely understand that, but it's still like, I think that this is objectively better. Yeah. Assuming it works.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So this is good shit. There's actually some more. So they have some bonus pet and mount rewards for tanks and healers in dungeons, and I guess some people would be like, well, that's unfair. But ultimately, if dungeons are more important, I think Blizzard know that maybe it's good if they can incentivize them. So the Death Chargers, Reigns, Swift White Hawk Strider, and Reigns of the Raven Lord can actually drop. I mean, I assume there's other bonus rewards too, but these are, the big ticket items with a low drop chance. And I assume they are just doing that as a targeted little bit of, here's a carrot because the limiting factor is probably going to be tanks and healers.
Which is really annoying. So I talked this last week actually in regards to retail, but I have this problem where I really like the classes I love to play are hybrids, right? I love, especially in Classic, I love having that hybrid utility at the world. It is fantastic. Been able to do absolutely crazy shit because I'm in Handsome Shaman. Just like, wait, because I actually have, here's an anecdote, right? It's, I can't remember what it's called. Is it Bill Madan? No. Whatever the dwarven place is in the Barrens, where there's all like the riflemen and stuff, and you're sent in there by the Wandering Tauren, because I'm playing Tauren Shaman. I was in there, and I was just clearing through. Troll Mage showed up. I was like, all right, we'll clear this place out together. And I was 25, maybe 24, 25, or maybe it was 23. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But it was like the early 20s, and he was early 20s. Then we cleared it out, but then there's a level 30 mob, and level 30, in Classic times meant you basically can't hit them if you're 5-6 levels below.
Yeah.
So we pulled them anyway to see what the crack was, if we could get them, even though there's like no reward for it. But then we were like, okay, well, we're doing very little amounts of damage, and he's hitting me like a truck. But what I realized was he wasn't hitting me hard enough because I have a one-hander and a shield at the minute to make sure I don't take damage. I was sitting there, and I had water shield up, and I could just keep refreshing water shield, and I could use lesser healing wave to mana efficient heal myself, and then Stoneclaw to draw attention to let me heal every now and again. So I had him this infinite loop where I was generating more mana with water shield to heal myself back up than he could actually do damage to me. So we got him in the end. And I was just sitting there going, hell yeah, this is this is hybrid gaming. This is what it's about. And I love that experience in the world. But then you go over to it comes time for the end game, which is a completely different experience, and one I've actually learned. I think I like the end game of World of Warcraft substantially less than I do the rest of it. And that's
you've always been a big man for the alts, I've noticed. Yeah,
I've always been that, and I feel it more now than ever that I've been leveling loads in Classic, even in Wrath, which is easier than the original versions. But it was this idea of just, hit end game. I want to be enhancement. I want to do some damage. I want to do a bit. I want to, wreck Bill. I want to, a bit late to be one-shotting people with two-hand Wind Fury. But, I want to have that experience of DPSing. But I know for queue times and for availability of actually getting into raid, I'll do the same thing I do in retail, which is I really want to play DPS because I want the experience of being DPS. But then, fuck it, I'll just heal because that's more efficient. And that's kind of the awkward experience I always have with World of Warcraft. So this is bad news for me because I'm just going to end up going resto. If I do make it to like 80, I'm like, fuck, fine, I'll just heal. Bad times.
Yeah.
This is the problem. The two video games that are World of Warcraft clash of each other and deliver me a slightly annoying experience. Which is obviously, it's not a big deal. I could just suck it up in DPS. I could just go to Fiverr and pay someone to heal with me or something. But yeah.
Oh man, it's time to more than slightly annoy you because your favorite feature, Quest Tracker, is coming. It's just going to be coming later.
That's okay.
Yes. Now what is this? Let's see. Yeah, so this is with Warcraft Reloaded, where Brian Birmingham announced that the built-in Quest Tracker and Helper features will be making their way to Wrath Classic, but at a later date. And they feel okay about this because they were not implemented for Wrath's launch itself.
Yeah, it's very sad. I wish they would keep this out and get rid of it and entirely start the whole process of making World of Warcraft again without it. Because, and this is the awkward part, right? I have had the temptation because I hit the wall towards the end of the Barrens where like a lot of my quests were turning grey. I'm like, I really couldn't be bothered going to 1,000 Needles yet. I was like, I really struggled to optimize myself through the Barrens because I was just going all over the place because I'm really... Basically, I only play Wrath Classic when it's very late at night and I'm utterly wrecked. So I was like, I really desperately want to... Some part of me is going, just get questy. Then, because I want to get most use out of the bonus XP and, be close to 70 for launch stuff. But it's just install questy, Matt. Like the devil on my shoulder going, you can go very fast. You'll be able to make it. You won't fall behind the other people who are playing. You'll be grand. And I'm like, no, I have to like get behind me, Satan. I have to hold like my principles, my virtues intact. Because I know if I go, well, I've already done the Barons before, so if I install Questy and then uninstall it after, it'll be fine. But I know I would be too weak to, because the joy of bing, bang, wahoo, numbers go up, and my like extrinsic goal would be strong. So I'm like, no, I'm gonna have to hold back. I really wish, I mean, I don't want to make this a problem, because like everyone's saying, everyone just uses fucking Questy anyway. Yeah. Almost literally everyone, actually everyone I've run into and played with has just Questy, like announcements for quests finishing. So it's like, just hold your ground, Blizzard. I wish they did, but with Questy, it's hard to be pragmatic there.
Yeah,
which is the problem.
That's essentially the thing, and certainly as I have not leveled whatsoever, and it is looming, and I do want to play Wrath Classic, I am mostly thinking, oh dear.
Yeah, you're literally just gonna have to buy a boost and play on a different server. Just wait.
Can't not play on the server the boys are on, like, that would be ridiculous.
Well, that's the only option.